At midnight, my husband and I fled our own son's house in silence. What we had discovered terrified us. My daughter-in-law was not just planning to send us to a nursing home, but something much more sinister that would hasten our departure from this world forever. But before we continue, make sure you are subscribed to the channel and write in the comments, where are you watching this video from? We love to know how far our stories are reaching. My name is Emily, and for almost 50 years of marriage to David, I never imagined that the greatest danger to our lives would come from the woman our son chose as his wife. To-do began when we went to live with them after David suffered a mild heart attack. Our house in the suburbs had become too big to take care of alone, and Michael, our only son, insisted that we move to his house in the city. "It will be better for everyone, Mom," he said with that confident voice he always had. "This way we can take care of Dad and you will not be alone." In the first few days, Sarah, my daughter-in-law, seemed attentive. She served breakfast punctually, asked about David's medicines, and smiled when saying goodbye to go to work. But there was something in her look that unsettled me, a kind of constant calculation, as if every gesture was measured and every smile rehearsed in front of a mirror. It was in the third week that the first cracks appeared in the perfect facade. "Mrs. Emily," she started with that artificially sweet voice while I was washing the breakfast dishes. "Would you mind not moving things around the house so much? I have a system and it complicates things for me when things change places." I nodded, although all I had done was organize the pots better in the bottom drawer, which were one on top of the other, making it difficult to take the one needed. That same night, while we were all having dinner, Jacob, my 16-year-old grandson, commented that the rice I had prepared was delicious. "Grandma, you have to teach me how to make rice like this. Yours always turns out so fluffy." I saw Sarah's smile freeze instantly. Her eyes, normally calculating, darkened like the sky before a storm. "Jacob, do not exaggerate. It is just rice. And by the way, your grandmother should not be cooking." We agreed that I would take care of the kitchen, did we not, Mrs. Emily? We had never made such an agreement. But her tone admitted no objection. David coughed uncomfortably. Michael pretended not to notice, fixing his gaze on his plate. And Madison, my 14-year-old granddaughter, just shrugged as she had learned to do when her mother used that tone. "Excuse me, dear." "I just wanted to help," I murmured, feeling a knot in my throat that made it difficult to swallow the same rice I had prepared. The following weeks were a constant wear. Every action of ours was questioned, every habit criticized. David could no longer watch television after 9. It wastes too much electricity, even though Madison slept with her computer on all night. I could no longer receive my friends for coffee. The house gets too messy, even though Sarah organized noisy dinners with her colleagues almost every week. "Mom, are you guys okay?" Michael asked me one morning when we found ourselves alone in the kitchen. There was genuine concern in his eyes, but also a doubt that broke my heart. My son was torn between love for his parents and loyalty to his wife. "We are adapting, son," I replied with a weak smile, unable to tell the complete truth. How to explain that his wife was systematically dehumanizing us? How to say that every day in that house was a small death of our dignity? David, always more observant than me, held my hand under the table during dinner that night, a silent gesture of solidarity. He also realized what was happening, but like me, he did not want to cause problems for our son. The true horror began on a random Tuesday. I was folding some clothes in our room when I heard Sarah's voice coming from the office. The door was ajar, and it was not my intention to listen, but something in her tone made me stop. "Doctor, I understand perfectly. Yes, people of their age, of course. Heart problems, symptoms that seem natural, without raising suspicions." My blood ran cold. I approached the door slowly, holding my breath. And those combinations of medications you mentioned would really look like a natural death, especially with his cardiac history. Perfect. I stepped back instinctively as if I had been slapped. My legs went weak, and I had to lean on the wall not to fall. That could not be real. My daughter-in-law was consulting on how, how to kill us, how to make it look natural. I returned to our room in a state of shock. When David arrived from the little walk he took daily through the neighborhood, he found me sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall. "Emily? What happened?" The words came out broken, between sobs that I could no longer contain. I told everything I had heard, every horrible word, every macabre insinuation. David went pale, but unlike me, his reaction was of a dangerous calm. I saw his eyes, normally sweet, harden like never before. "Emily," he said with a voice that did not seem like his, "we have to leave here, today." We spent the rest of the day feigning normality while we planned our escape. David called his sister, Helen, who lived 3 hours away in the countryside. She agreed immediately to receive us without asking many questions. Something in David's voice must have communicated the urgency of the situation. At night, we had dinner in silence. Jacob realized that something was wrong and threw worried looks at me throughout the meal. That boy always had a special sensitivity, a capacity to perceive the feelings of others that Sarah constantly tried to stifle. After dinner, when everyone retired, David and I remained awake, sitting on the edge of the bed, holding hands, waiting. Every minute seemed like an eternity. The clock struck 11:30 when we finally got up. "Are you ready?" David whispered, holding our 2 small suitcases. I nodded, unable to speak. How had we reached this point? How was it possible that we were fleeing our own son's house in the middle of the night, like criminals? We left the room stepping carefully, avoiding the floorboards that creaked. We stopped briefly in front of Jacob's room. The pain of leaving without saying goodbye to my grandson was almost physical, an oppression in the chest that rivaled the fear I felt. David put his hand on my shoulder, reminding me in silence that we had to continue. We went down the stairs, every step a small miracle of silence. In the kitchen, I took David's medications that I had hidden before. I no longer trusted the ones in the bathroom cabinet, not after what I had heard. The back door opened with a soft click, and the cold air of the early morning received us like a slap. I looked for the last time at the kitchen, where I had prepared so many meals for my family, the living room where we had celebrated birthdays, the walls that held photographs of happier times. "Let's go," David whispered, and we went out into the night. The bus terminal was practically deserted at that hour. We sat on a hard bench, our suitcases at our feet, 2 elderly people out of place in the middle of the night. The fluorescent lights revealed without mercy our exhausted expressions, our wrinkled clothes, our wounded dignity. "Everything is going to be all right, Emily," said David, squeezing my hand. "We are going to start over." I did not have the courage to say that at 74 years old, new beginnings were almost impossible luxuries. Instead, I leaned my head on his shoulder and closed my eyes, trying not to think about what we were leaving behind. The bus arrived promptly at 2 in the morning. The driver, a middle-aged man with deep dark circles, helped us with the suitcases, throwing us curious but kind looks. Who would be those 2 elderly people traveling alone in the middle of the night? What story did they carry with them? When the engine roared and the bus began to move, I felt that the tears I had contained finally overflowed. They were not tears only of sadness, but of relief, of fear, of uncertainty, all the complexity of emotions that accompanies those who are forced to leave everything to survive. David put his arm around my shoulders and pulled me closer. His body trembled slightly, and I realized that he was also crying, silently, as he had learned to do all his life. "Who would have thought," he whispered bitterly, "that after a whole life building a home for our son, we would end up fleeing his house like thieves in the night?" I did not answer. There was no possible answer to that devastating realization. Through the bus window, I saw the city lights moving away, smaller and smaller, until they became just a distant blur on the dark horizon. In front of us, only the road and the uncertainty of dawn. Helen received us with open arms when we got off the bus at sunrise. Her aged face lit up when she saw us, But joy soon gave way to worry when she noticed our exhausted expressions and red eyes from crying so much. "My God, what happened to you two?" she asked while hugging us. David shook his head. "Later, sister. Now we just need to rest." Helen's house was small but cozy. Since her husband passed away 3 years earlier, she lived alone with her 2 cats and a garden that was her pride. She showed us the guest room. "Now it is yours for as long as you need," and she left us to rest. I fell into bed completely dressed, without strength even to take off my shoes. The body finally yielded to fatigue, but the mind continued in a whirlwind. Images of Sarah talking on the phone, of Jacob's worried face, of the house we had left, everything mixed in a confusing swirl. "What do you think Michael will do when he discovers we fled?" I asked David, who was lying on his back, staring at the ceiling. "I do not know, Emily. I really do not know." The morning advanced into the afternoon and then into the night without us leaving the room. Helen knocked on the door a few times, offering us food that we barely tasted. The next day, when I finally found the strength to get up and take a shower, I looked at myself in the mirror and almost did not recognize myself. The face looking back at me was older, more tired, the eyes opaque like fogged glass. David seemed equally dejected. His blood pressure was high despite the medications, and a persistent cough bothered him. The nightly escape had taken its toll on our elderly bodies. On the 3rd day, Helen's phone rang. It was Michael. Helen came to the room, holding the device with a doubtful expression. "It is your son. He is very upset." David reached out to take the phone, but it was me who took it. I needed to hear my son's voice, even if it was to hear accusations. "Michael? Mom?" His voice was choked, a mixture of relief and rage. "How could you do this? Just disappear in the middle of the night?" "We are crazy with worry. Jacob does not stop crying." The mention of my grandson squeezed my heart. "Son, No, Mom, there is no excuse. You left a crazy letter saying that you were not welcome, that you needed to go to preserve your dignity." "What are you talking about? This is your house, too." I took a deep breath, looking for words. How to explain? How to make my son understand that his wife planned to kill us? It would sound like the delirium of a paranoid old woman. "Michael, things were not right. Sarah, she did not want us there. That is crazy. Sarah always took care of you. She always worried." His denial was so absolute that it made me doubt myself for a moment. Could it be that I had interpreted everything wrong? Could it be that the conversation I heard had another meaning? No, impossible. I knew what I had heard. "Son, we could no longer stay. Please try to understand." Understand what? That my parents preferred to run away like rebellious teenagers instead of talking to me? That you left Jacob and Madison devastated? That you made me look like a negligent son who kicked out his own parents? His voice broke in the last sentence, and I realized that his anger came more from shame and confusion than anything else. Michael always cared about appearances, what others would think of him. And now, with our escape, we had stained his image of a perfect son. "We love you, Michael. We will always love you, but we could not stay. Because of Sarah? Is that it? What did she do that was so terrible?" The question remained floating in the air like dense smoke. I looked at David, who had come closer and was listening to the conversation. His eyes told me not to tell, not to plant that poisonous seed yet. We just needed a space of our own, son, where we did not feel like a burden. There was a long silence. When Michael spoke again, his voice was more contained, colder. "I never considered you a burden. And if Sarah made you feel that way, I am very sorry. But fleeing like that I cannot forgive easily." After hanging up, I stared at the phone for a long time. The distance between my son and me seemed insurmountable now, an abyss dug not only by physical miles, but by everything that was not said, by everything he refused to see. The following weeks were an exercise in adaptation. Helen was a gentle hostess, but she was used to living alone. We had to relearn how to coexist, to respect spaces, to create new routines. David spent hours in the small backyard garden, taking care of the plants with a dedication that bordered on obsession. I helped in the kitchen and with household chores, grateful to be able to do something useful without constant criticism. One sunny Sunday, about a month after our arrival, we were having coffee on the porch when an unknown car parked in front of the house. My heart raced as I recognized Jacob getting out of the passenger seat. Michael was at the wheel, his tense face visible through the windshield. "Grandma! Grandpa!" Jacob ran towards us, eyes wide, face lit by a smile that momentarily washed away all the pain of the last weeks. I hugged my grandson tightly, feeling his adolescent body, still growing now almost my height. He smelled of shampoo and something indefinable that was just Jacob. "My boy," I whispered against his hair. "I missed you so much." David joined the hug, with glassy eyes. Behind Jacob, Michael approached slowly, as if he were not sure of his welcome. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice almost shy, so different from the accusatory tone of the last call. Helen, who was watching from the door, made a wide gesture of welcome. "This house is open to the whole family." We sat in the small living room, an uncomfortable silence floating between us. Jacob talked a mile a minute, telling us about school, his friends, the latest neighborhood news, filling the void with his teenage energy. "Madison wanted to come too," he said finally, but Mom did not let her. A shadow crossed Michael's face. "Madison is grounded because of her grades," he explained quickly. "It has nothing to do with this visit." I nodded, although I did not quite believe it. I knew Sarah's tactics too well. "How are you?" Michael asked after a while, looking around as if evaluating our living conditions. "We are fine, son," David replied with dignity. "Helen has been wonderful." "Fine, fine." Michael seemed uncomfortable, moving in his chair. "I have thought a lot about what happened, about why you felt you had to leave that way." I exchanged a quick glance with David. Could it be that Michael was finally starting to see the truth? "I spoke with Sarah," he continued. "She is really hurt. She feels that you never gave her a chance for the three of you to truly understand each other." The mention of her name made my stomach turn. The audacity of that woman, becoming the victim after everything she had done. "Michael," David began with a calm voice, "there are things that happened that you do not know. I know you guys believed Sarah was very controlling," interrupted Michael. "I know there were tensions, but fleeing in the middle of the night, leaving only a letter, that destroyed our family." The contained rage finally overflowed. Jacob shrank on the sofa, looking at the floor. "Our family was already destroyed, son," I replied with a firmness that surprised me. "It was destroyed every time Sarah humiliated us, every time we were treated like unwanted burdens, every time our grandchildren were forbidden to spend time with us." "Mom, that is an exaggeration. Sarah always—" "Always what, Michael?" David stood up, leaning on his cane. "Always smiled when you were watching? Always pretended concern when there were witnesses? Did you not see what happened when you were not around?" Jacob raised his head, eyes shining with contained tears. "Dad, grandparents are right. Mom, she was not nice to them." Michael looked at his son as if seeing him for the first time. "What do you mean by that, Jacob?" "She said things, all the time, that they were a weight, that they spent too much, that they got in the way in the house. She even blamed Grandma when things disappeared. She said Grandma was becoming forgetful, that maybe she had, how did she say it, incipient dementia." The words floated in the air like an insult. Michael went pale. "Why did you never tell me this?" Jacob shrugged, a gesture so adolescent and at the same time so eloquent. "You never asked, Dad." The silence that followed was dense, loaded with revelations that Michael seemed to finally be processing. His face went through various emotions: surprise, denial, rage, guilt. I did not know, he said finally, voice low. I swear I did not know things were like that. You did not want to see, son, replied David without accusation, just stating a fact. It was easier to believe that everything was fine, that we were a happy family. Michael ran his hand over his face, a gesture that reminded me so much of the boy he once was, confused with some math problem. Even so, he said after a while, fleeing in the middle of the night. Was there more? I interrupted, unable to contain it any longer. There was something much worse happening. I told then about the conversation I had heard, Sarah's exact words on the phone, the consultation about medications that could cause deaths that would look natural. Michael's face transformed as I spoke, first in disbelief, then in horror, finally in something close to despair. No, he stammered. No, that cannot be true. Sarah would never, she could not. I know what I heard, son, I insisted with sweetness. That is why we had to leave that way. It was not just about dignity, it was about survival. Jacob was deathly pale. Was Mom going to hurt you? David approached his grandson, putting his hand on his shoulder. We do not know exactly what she planned, Jacob. We just know we could not take the risk. Michael stood up abruptly and walked to the window, turning his back on us. His shoulders shook slightly, and I realized he was crying. My son, my boy, who was always so strong, so sure, now collapsed before the possibility that his wife was capable of such monstrosity. Jacob approached his father with doubts, as if he did not know what to do. Finally, he put his hand on his back, a timid touch of solidarity. Dad, I need to think, said Michael finally without turning around. I need to process all of this. The rest of the visit was silent, loaded with unresolved emotions. When they finally prepared to leave, Michael hugged me tightly like he had not done since he was a child. I am sorry, Mom, he whispered. I am very sorry for not realizing it. It is okay, my son, I replied, caressing his hair as I did when he was little. You are realizing it now. That is what matters. As the car drove away with Jacob waving through the window, I felt a mixture of hope and apprehension. The truth was finally emerging. But at what price? What storm would Michael face upon returning home, upon confronting Sarah? David took my hand as if reading my thoughts. He will be fine, Emily. Michael was always strong. I nodded, although I was not so sure. There are certain types of strength that we only discover we possess when we are forced to face the most painful of truths, that those we love are not always who we think they are. 2 weeks passed without news from Michael or the kids. I tried to call a few times, but I only managed to speak with Jacob, briefly when he answered the phone one Sunday. He seemed nervous, speaking in hurried whispers. Everything is fine, Grandma, but I cannot talk now. Dad and Mom are fighting a lot. She denies everything. She says that you are inventing stories to break up the family. And your father, what does he believe? He does not know who to believe. I think deep down he knows that you would not lie, but it is hard for him to accept that Mom. Jacob paused as if listening to something. I have to hang up. I love you guys. That brief conversation left me even more anxious. The image of Sarah denying everything, turning us into liars, manipulating Michael again, was exactly what I feared. David tried to calm me down, but I knew him too well not to notice that he was also deeply worried. His blood pressure fluctuated again, and the persistent cough woke him up several times during the night. We should have stayed quiet, I lamented one night, while we were preparing dinner with Helen. Maybe it would have been better if Michael never knew, and let them believe that we abandoned the family on a whim? David shook his head. No, Emily, the truth had to be told, however painful it might be. But what if he chooses to believe her? What if we never see our grandchildren again? Helen, who was cutting vegetables in silence, intervened with her direct wisdom. The truth always finds a way, Emily. It may take time, it may hurt, but eventually it comes to light. I wanted to believe that. I needed to believe. The next morning, I was helping Helen hang clothes on the clothesline when a car parked abruptly in front of the house. My heart raced as I recognized Michael's vehicle. But it was not my son who got out first. It was Madison, my granddaughter, whom I had not seen for more than 2 months. "Grandma," she shouted, running towards me with open arms. I hugged her tightly, feeling her thin body, noticing that she had grown a few inches since the last time we saw each other. Her hair was also different, shorter, framing her almost womanly face. "My girl," I whispered against her hair. "I missed you so much." Over her shoulder, I saw Jacob getting out of the car, followed by Michael. My son looked exhausted, with deep dark circles and a beard of several days that he had never allowed himself before. David came out of the house hearing the commotion, leaning on his cane. His face lit up when he saw his granddaughter. "Madison! My God, how you have grown!" While David and Madison hugged, I approached Michael. There was something different about him, besides the tired appearance. A resolution in his eyes that was not there on the last visit. "Mom," he said simply, hugging me. "Are you okay, son?" I asked, worried about his appearance. He gave me a sad smile. "No, I am not, but I will be." We all went into the house, where Helen was already preparing a pitcher of lemonade. We sat in the living room, an expectant silence floating between us. It was Michael who finally broke it. "I discovered that you were right about Sarah." The phrase fell like a stone in calm water. I looked at David, who seemed equally surprised by the direct declaration. "What happened?" asked David finally. Michael looked at his children, as if evaluating how much they should hear. Jacob made an almost imperceptible gesture of encouragement. After our last visit, I started paying more attention, to observe Sarah when she did not know I was watching, to notice how she talked about you when she thought we were alone. He ran his hand through his hair, a nervous gesture that reminded me so much of when he was a child and had to confess some mischief. "At first I thought you were exaggerating, that maybe there were misunderstandings, things taken out of context. But then..." "Then what, son?" "Then I found the medications. My blood ran cold." "What medications?" "In the closet of our room, hidden in a shoebox. Heart medicines with altered labels, pills that did not match the packaging, even some substances that I could not identify." Madison let out a small sob. Jacob put his arm around his sister, pulling her closer in a protective gesture that made me realize how much they had grown in these difficult months. "I confronted Sarah," continued Michael, his voice now almost a whisper. "I showed her what I had found and demanded explanations." "And what did she say?" I asked, although I already feared the answer. First, she denied everything. She said she did not know where those medications came from, that maybe they were mine or even yours. When I insisted, she changed tactics. She started crying, saying that I was becoming paranoid, that I was letting my parents manipulate my mind against her. Michael took a deep breath, as if he needed to gather strength to continue. Then I mentioned the conversation you heard, Mom, about the medications that could cause a death that would look natural. It was there that I saw... "What, son?" I saw something in her eyes, something cold, calculating that I had never noticed before. For a second, the mask fell completely, and I saw... I do not know how to explain, but it was not the woman I thought I knew all these years. The silence that followed was dense, oppressive. Madison cried silently while Jacob stared at his own hands. "What happened next?" asked David finally. She realized that I had seen beyond the facade. She tried to compose herself, return to the role of misunderstood wife, but it was too late. I asked her to leave the house that same night. "And she left?" I asked, surprised by the speed of events. "Not without a fight." A bitter smile formed on Michael's lips. "She threatened to take the children from me, said she would tell everyone that I assaulted her, that she would invent 1,000 stories to destroy me." "Dad?" Jacob intervened for the first time. "Tell the rest." Michael hesitated, looking at his eldest son. I do not know if— They have the right to know everything, insisted Jacob with surprising maturity. Michael nodded slowly. That night, after I asked Sarah to leave, I called a friend of mine who is a pharmacist. I sent him photos of the medications I found. I asked him to explain what they were. My heart raced, anticipating what would come next. Some were really heart medicines, but in doses much higher than Dad took. Others— Michael swallowed. Others were substances that, combined with cardiac medications, could cause heart failure. Exactly as you heard in her conversation, Mom. I closed my eyes, feeling a wave of nausea. It was one thing to suspect, another completely different to have the confirmation. The next day, continued Michael, Sarah returned with a lawyer, demanding half the house, custody of the children, alimony. When I mentioned the medications, she denied everything. She said I was inventing to not pay what she deserved. And what did you do? Asked David. I showed her the photos I had taken of everything, the results of my pharmacist friend's analysis, and told her that if she did not leave our lives peacefully, I would take everything to the police. Madison sobbed harder. She left that night. She said I was an ingrate, that I was going to regret choosing to stay with Dad, that— His voice broke. Jacob completed. She said horrible things to Madison, that she was as insignificant as the grandparents, that she took after the useless old people. I felt physical pain listening to that. How could anyone speak like that to their own daughter? It is okay, assured Michael, pulling Madison into a hug. She is with her parents, in another city. She filed for divorce but gave up custody in exchange for a financial settlement. I think she realized she would not have a chance with everything we discovered. And you guys? I asked, looking at my grandchildren. How are you dealing with all this? Jacob shrugged, in that typically adolescent gesture that tries to hide deep emotions. It is weird. Sometimes I miss her, even after everything. She is my mother, you know. But then I remember what she planned to do to you, how she treated Grandma, and I get confused. I have nightmares, confessed Madison in a low voice. I dream that I am taking medications and cannot stop, even knowing they are going to hurt me. David approached his granddaughter, taking her hands affectionately. They are just dreams, my dear. They will disappear with time. Dad, Mom, said Michael after a moment of silence, I want you to come back home. The phrase floated in the air like an unexpected offer. I exchanged a look with David, seeing in him the same doubt I felt. Son, I know it is difficult after everything, he interrupted, guessing my reluctance. I know you felt betrayed not only by Sarah, but by me too, for not having seen what was happening, for having doubted you. It is not that, Michael, explained David softly. It is that we found a certain peace here. Helen has been wonderful, and little by little we are rebuilding our routine. Please, implored Madison, eyes still wet with tears. We miss you so much. My heart clenched at that sincere request. How could I refuse? We can think about it, I promised, looking for David's approval. He nodded slightly. Maybe visit first, see how we feel. That is all I ask, said Michael, visibly relieved. A chance to start over as a family. The rest of the visit was lighter, with the grandchildren telling stories about school, their friends, plans for the future. Madison had decided she wanted to be a doctor, to help the elderly, like you, Grandma. And Jacob was thinking about law, inspired by recent events. When they finally left with promises to return the next weekend, I sat exhausted on the living room sofa. What do you think? I asked David, who seemed equally exhausted by the intensity of the meeting. About going back? He considered it for a moment. I do not know, Emily. There are so many painful memories in that house now. Helen, who had kept discreetly apart during the visit, joined us with a tea tray. You know you can stay here for as long as you want, she assured. This house is as much yours as mine now. Thank you, Helen, said David with sincerity. I do not know what we would have done without you. We drank tea in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. The possibility of returning floated between us like an unanswered question, loaded with hope, but also with apprehension. That night, lying next to David, I observed his profile in the gloom of the room. The lines of his face seemed softer now, less tense than in previous months. "What are you thinking about?" I asked, tracing the wrinkles on his forehead with my finger. "I am thinking about how life turns around," he replied, turning to look at me. 3 months ago, we fled in the middle of the night, fearing for our future. Now we are invited to return as if nothing had happened. It is not like that. Many things happened. Many things changed. Yes, but deep down, we are still us. You, me, Michael, the kids, the family we always were before Sarah. I nodded, understanding what he meant. Despite everything, the essential core of what we were had survived, hurt, healing, but still intact. Do you think we should go back? David remained silent for so long I thought he had fallen asleep. Finally, he spoke. "I think we should visit first, as you suggested. See how we feel, take one step at a time." I agreed, snuggling against his familiar body, finding comfort in the heat radiating from him. We did not need to decide everything at that moment. We had time now, a luxury that just a few weeks ago seemed impossible. While I fell asleep, I thought of my grandchildren's faces, my son's regretful look, the house that for so long we called home. Would we manage to rebuild what had been broken? Could the wounds really heal? The future was uncertain, but for the first time in months, it was a future I did not fear facing. On the Saturday morning agreed for our first visit to Michael's house, I woke up before the sun came up. I had slept poorly, tormented by confused dreams in which I saw myself again in that kitchen, hearing Sarah's voice on the phone, talking about lethal medications. David also seemed restless. He drank his coffee in silence, eyes fixed on some distant point. When Helen asked if we were nervous, both of us quickly denied it, an automatic reflex of someone who spent a lifetime hiding fragilities. "You do not have to lie to me," she said with that frankness that always characterized her. "It is natural that you are anxious. That house holds difficult memories." "It is not just that," I confessed finally. "It is that. What if we do not succeed? What if it is too strange, too uncomfortable? What if the kids notice our discomfort and think it is their fault?" Helen poured more coffee, the comforting aroma filling the small kitchen. "You are thinking too much. It is just a visit. Go, spend the day. See how you feel. If it is too much, you come back here. It is simple." Her practicality made me smile. When you put it like that, it seems easy. "Life is rarely as complicated as we make it," she replied, shrugging. Michael arrived promptly at 9, alone. "The kids are preparing a surprise," he explained with a shy smile. "They are anxious to see you." The trip back to the city where we had lived most of our lives was strangely silent. I watched the subtle changes in the landscape through the car window. A new store here, a renovated house there. Only 3 months had passed, but it seemed much longer. When we approached the familiar neighborhood, I felt my heart race. The tree-lined streets, the well-kept houses, the flowering gardens, everything seemed at once so familiar and so distant. "I made some changes to the house," commented Michael as he turned onto our street. "I thought it would be good, to make the space different from what it was when—" He did not complete the sentence, but we understood. When Sarah was there, when we were prisoners in our own home. Parking in front of the 2-story house that for so long was our home, I was surprised to notice that the front garden was completely transformed. The meticulously trimmed hedges that Sarah appreciated so much had been replaced by beds of colorful flowers and native plants. "Jacob is getting interested in gardening," explained Michael, noticing my look. "He said he learned from Grandpa." David smiled, genuinely moved. He was always a good observer. When the front door opened, Jacob and Madison ran out, as they did when they were little and heard the car arrive. For a moment, time seemed to go back, and we were again the family we used to be before bitterness and evil poisoned our daily life. "Grandma! Grandpa!" they shouted in unison, hugging us with such enthusiasm that we almost lost our balance. "Calm down. You are going to knock your grandparents over," laughed Michael, a sound we had not heard for months. We entered the house, and immediately I noticed the changes. The walls, before an insipid beige that Sarah insisted was sophisticated, were now painted in soft tones of blue and green. The furniture had been rearranged, creating cozier spaces. The family photographs, which Sarah had gradually removed, were back, including several of David and me when we were young. "Come see." Madison pulled us by the hand, guiding us to the dining room. The table was set with care, decorated with fresh flowers and our favorite dishes: the chicken pot pie I used to make on Sundays, the potato salad that David loved, even the flan from my old recipe. "We cooked everything," explained Jacob proudly. "Well, Dad helped with the oven, but the rest we did ourselves." "We found your old recipes in a notebook in the office," added Madison. "I hope everything is good." I felt tears fogging my vision. The affection of that gesture, the effort to make us feel welcome, was almost too much for my heart. "It is perfect," I managed to say. "Absolutely perfect." We had lunch in a surprisingly relaxed atmosphere. The kids talked nonstop, telling stories from school, vacation plans, details about their friends. Michael seemed calmer than I had seen him in years, laughing at Jacob's jokes, listening attentively to Madison's dreams about medical school. After lunch, while the kids cleaned the table, "It is our responsibility now, Grandma. We have a chore schedule and everything." Michael invited us to see the changes in the rest of the house. Upstairs, he opened the door of a room that was previously used as Sarah's office. "I made some adaptations," he explained with a sudden doubt. "If you want to come back, of course." The room had been transformed into a comfortable and bright bedroom. A double bed with a colorful quilt, curtains that let in the sunlight, a reading armchair in the corner near the window. "It is the master bedroom now," explained Michael. "I moved to the smaller one. I thought you deserved the best space in the house." "Son, you did not have to," began. David visibly moved. "Yes, I did," interrupted Michael firmly. "I want you to feel completely at ease if you decide to return. This is your home. It always has been." We continued the tour of the house. Every room had been modified in some way, as if Michael were trying to exorcise the painful memories through the physical transformation of the spaces. In the backyard, the greatest surprise, the small patch that David loved so much, had been expanded, transformed into a real vegetable garden with tomatoes, lettuce, carrots, and aromatic herbs. "Jacob started this," explained Michael, while we walked among the well-kept beds. "He said you always wanted a real vegetable garden, Dad, but that it was never allowed." David knelt with difficulty, touching the humid earth with his wrinkled hands. "It is perfect," he murmured, voice choked with emotion. We passed the rest of the afternoon in the garden, David giving advice on plants, Jacob absorbing every word as if they were precious revelations. Madison joined us with a pitcher of lemonade, and Michael brought chairs so we could sit in the shade of the old tree. It was a scene so simple, so daily, and yet it seemed almost miraculous after everything we had lived. When the sun began to set, Michael finally asked the question that had been floating in the air all day. "Well, what did you think?" I looked at David, trying to read in his eyes what he felt. He nodded slightly, a gesture almost imperceptible, but that after 50 years of marriage I understood perfectly. "The changes are beautiful, son," I replied with sincerity. "You made this house a new place. So—" Jacob could barely contain his anxiety. "Are you coming back?" I felt the weight of that question, the hope in my grandchildren's eyes, Michael's poorly disguised expectation. "I think we can try," replied David finally. "Maybe start little by little. A few days a week, see how we feel." The faces around us lit up. "Seriously?" Madison almost jumped from the chair. "You are coming back." "We are going to try," I reaffirmed, cautious but hopeful. "One day at a time." "That is all I ask," said Michael, and for the first time in a long time, I saw in his eyes the boy I had raised, the son who had always loved his parents, before the adult world took him away from us. On the trip back to Helen's house, we talked about practical arrangements. What would we bring? When would we start this transition? How would we adequately thank David's sister for her unconditional hospitality? "Are you really ready for this?" I asked David when we were alone in our room, preparing to sleep. He considered the question for a moment, his thoughtful face reflected in the mirror while brushing his teeth. "Do you know what I felt today, Emily? I felt that finally we could be ourselves again. We no longer needed to tread carefully, measure every word, fear every reaction. It was like breathing after being submerged for a long time." I nodded, understanding the feeling perfectly. "I felt that too, as if a weight had been removed. The kids seem happy," he observed, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Lighter, more authentic. Yes, I had not realized how much Sarah also affected them until seeing how they are now." David took my hand, his fingers intertwining with mine with the familiarity of decades of similar gestures. "I think we can do this, Emily. Rebuild. Start over. It will not be easy. There are many memories in that house. But maybe we can create new memories. Better ones." I leaned my head on his shoulder, feeling the comfort of his body next to mine, the security I always found in his presence. "One day at a time," I whispered, repeating what I had said to the grandchildren. "One day at a time." He nodded. The following weeks, we began the gradual transition. First, we spent only the weekends at Michael's house, returning to Helen's house during the week. Then we started staying 3-4 days in a row, bringing more of our things on each visit. Helen observed our movement with an understanding smile. "You are coming home," she stated without sadness, only with the serene acceptance that always characterized her. "It is how it should be." "We can never thank you enough," said David to his sister on our last official night at her house. "You saved our lives, Helen, not only by giving us shelter but by returning our dignity when we needed it most. That is what family is for," she replied simply, as if housing fugitive relatives in the middle of the night was the most natural thing in the world, and you will always be welcome here, anytime. The day we officially moved back to Michael's house was marked by a small celebration. Jacob and Madison had prepared a homemade cake, decorated with the words, "Welcome back, Grandma and Grandpa," written in colorful icing. Michael opened a bottle of wine he was saving for special occasions. "A toast to family," he proposed, raising his glass, "to those who will always be here for each other, in good and bad times." We toasted, and in that simple moment, I felt that a cycle was completing. We had passed through fire and come out the other side. Wounded, yes, but also strengthened, purified in a way that only suffering can provide. That night, lying in the bed of the master bedroom that was now ours, I listened to the familiar sounds of the house, the ticking of the clock in the living room, the occasional creak of the wooden floor, Jacob's distant laughter watching some program on TV. Ordinary, everyday sounds that just a few months ago seemed lost forever. Sounds of home, of belonging, of security. David was already sleeping next to me, his rhythmic breathing offering me the comfort of decades of shared nights. I looked at his relaxed face in sleep and felt a wave of gratitude so intense that it almost hurt. We had survived. Not only escaped the literal death that Sarah had planned, but also the slow and insidious death of dignity, of self-respect, of family love. I closed my eyes, letting myself be enveloped by sleep that finally came without fear, without nightmares, without the anxiety that for so long had been my constant companion. We were home. Finally. Truly home. The first months back at Michael's house were like learning to walk again after a long illness. Every day brought small adjustments, moments of doubt followed by careful advances. There were days when everything flowed naturally, as if we had never left. And there were days when an object, a sound, or a smell awakened painful memories, making us retreat instinctively. David and I developed a silent code for these moments. A light touch on the arm meant, "I am uncomfortable." A firmer handshake said, "I need a moment." The grandchildren, with that sharp perception of the young, soon caught our signals and created their own interventions. "Grandma, are you coming to help me in the kitchen?" Madison would ask casually, offering an exit when she noticed my discomfort. "Grandpa, what do you think of that new plant in the garden?" Jacob would create a distraction when he saw David tense up. Michael observed these small dynamics with a mixture of guilt and gratitude. One afternoon, while we were having coffee on the porch, he finally verbalized what seemed to be on his mind for weeks. "You should not need this," he said suddenly. "These codes, these escapes." I looked at my son, noticing the new wrinkles on his face, the hair starting to show gray at the temples. The pain of the last months had left physical marks on him too. "It is part of the process, son," I replied with sweetness. "A deep wound does not heal overnight." "But the wound should not even exist," he insisted, voice loaded with self-punishment. "I should have seen what was happening. I should have protected you." David, who until then was silently observing the garden, turned to Michael. "Son, you trusted your wife. It is what we do with the people we love. We trust them. But you tried to warn me in so many different ways." "Sarah was very skilled," I interrupted softly. "She knew exactly how to look like the perfect wife and mother when you were watching, and she knew how to make us look paranoid, confused, ungrateful." Michael shook his head, unconvinced. "Still, you were my parents. I should've, could've, would've," David interrupted him firmly. "Those are the three most useless words in the language, son. We cannot change the past. We can only learn from it and move forward." That conversation was a turning point. After it, Michael seemed to put aside part of the guilt he carried, becoming more present, more committed to rebuilding our family. Weeks turned into months. Seasons changed, bringing new colors to the garden that David and Jacob took care of with such affection. The routine established itself, comfortable and predictable in a way we never appreciated so much before. I went back to cooking regularly, rediscovering the pleasure of preparing the family recipes that Sarah had gradually forbidden me. Madison became my enthusiastic assistant, absorbing every technique, every culinary secret, as if they were precious treasures. "Grandma, how do you make the cake so fluffy?" she asked, watching attentively while I beat the batter. "The secret is in the movement," I explained, demonstrating the technique my own grandmother had taught me decades ago. "It is not just mixing the ingredients, it is understanding how they behave together." David began to dedicate most of his time to the garden, transforming it into an oasis of colors and fragrances. The seeds we planted symbolized our own journey, buried in the dark, struggling to emerge, finally blooming under the sun. One afternoon, while we were harvesting tomatoes for dinner, Jacob asked a question that took us by surprise. "Do you have news of her, of my mother?" David and I exchanged quick glances. It was the first time in months that any of the grandchildren mentioned Sarah directly. "No, my son," I replied carefully. "We do not. Dad says she is living in another city now with her parents." "That is what we heard too," I confirmed, watching his expression carefully. Jacob continued harvesting tomatoes in silence for a moment before finally asking what really seemed to be on his mind. "Do you think that she was really going to hurt you? I mean, on purpose?" The question floated in the air like a dark cloud. how to answer honestly without deepening the wound already open in this teenager's heart. David knelt with difficulty, remaining at eye level with Jacob, who even at his 16 years still had not reached full height. "Jacob, sometimes people do terrible things when they are consumed by certain feelings." Your mother hesitated, choosing words carefully. Your mother had problems that none of us could really see or understand. But was she really going to, he could not complete the sentence. "We found evidence that she was planning something very serious," I replied, opting for honesty without going into macabre details. "But the important thing is that we are all safe now, including you and your sister." Jacob nodded slowly, processing the information. "Sometimes I wonder if I did something wrong, if I could have prevented it somehow," confessed Jacob, lowering his head. I let go of the tomato basket and hugged my grandson tightly, feeling his teenage body tremble slightly against mine. "Jacob, look at me," I asked, holding his face between my wrinkled hands. "None of this was your fault. Absolutely nothing. You were just a child. You still are, in many ways, trying to navigate a situation created by adults. But I saw how she treated you. I knew something was wrong and I did not do enough." David approached, putting his hand on the grandson's shoulder. "You did more than many adults would have had the courage to do. You defended us when you could. You comforted us when we needed it. You were our light in the darkest days." Jacob quickly wiped a stubborn tear. "I just wanted us to be a normal family, like in stories with grandparents making cookies and telling tales, without all this mess." I smiled with sadness, understanding perfectly the longing for that normality that was stolen from us. And that is what we are building now, is it not? A normal family where we love and take care of each other. Do you think one day it is going to, I do not know, stop hurting? The question, so simple and so deep at the same time, remained suspended between us. I saw David swallow, his own eyes glassy. "I do not think it stops completely," I replied honestly, "but it becomes different, less sharp, more like a distant echo that weakens with time, until one day you realize that hours, entire days have passed without you feeling that pain." Jacob nodded, seeming to find some comfort in that perspective. "And do you know what helps?" added David, his voice firmer now, "creating new memories. Good memories, like this, harvesting tomatoes in the garden we planted together, talking honestly, simply being a family." That moment in the garden marked another turning point in our journey. The conversation opened doors to others, equally honest and healing. Madison eventually shared her own fears and doubts. Michael talked about the guilt he still carried. David and I could finally express the full extent of the terror we had lived. Every conversation was like removing a thorn buried deep, painful in the moment, but providing relief afterwards. With time, we learned to talk about Sarah without her name sending waves of tension through the room. It was not forgiveness exactly, especially for me, who had heard that macabre phone conversation, but a kind of acceptance. She had been a part of our lives, had caused deep damage, but we would not allow her to continue having power over our present, our future. One Sunday afternoon, about 8 months after our return, we were all in the living room after lunch. Madison was playing the piano, a talent that Sarah had discouraged considering it noisy, while Jacob read a book lying on the rug. Michael and David were playing chess, a tradition they had resumed. I was knitting a scarf for the approaching winter. I looked at that everyday scene and felt a wave of gratitude so intense that my eyes filled with tears. Michael noticed and approached, sitting next to me on the sofa. "Is everything okay, Mom?" "Everything is perfect," I replied with sincerity. "Simply perfect." He smiled, understanding. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and panic, thinking that all this is a dream, that I am going to wake up and you will have disappeared again, or that Sarah will have returned with her lies and manipulations. I have those moments too, I confessed. I think we all have them. But then I see you at breakfast. I hear Dad talking to Jacob in the garden. I hear Madison playing the piano, and I know it is real, that we survived." I squeezed his hand, feeling the emotion in his voice. Yes, we survived, and more than that, we are living again. That night, lying next to David, I contemplated the path we had traveled, from the silent prison our life had become to the desperate escape at dawn, to the months of uncertainty at Helen's house, to the horrible revelation of Sarah's plans, and finally to the slow and careful return home. "A penny for your thoughts," murmured David sleepily beside me. "I am thinking about how lucky we are despite everything." "Lucky?" He turned to look at me in the gloom of the room. That is an interesting word to use after everything we went through. But it is true, is it not? We managed to escape. Michael discovered the truth in time. The kids are with us, safe and loved, and we have each other after all. David remained silent for a moment, reflecting on my words. "You are right," he finally nodded. "Many elderly people face abandonment, oblivion, even abuse, and never find a way out, never have the chance to start over." Exactly. And here we are in our 70s, building a new life. "A good life," he added, pulling me closer. "A good life," I agreed, snuggling against him as I had done for more than 50 years. The next morning, I woke up early before everyone in the house. I prepared coffee and went out to the porch with my steaming mug, watching the sunrise. David's garden shone with dew, every drop reflecting the golden morning light like small jewels scattered over the leaves and flowers. There was a peace in that moment that seemed almost sacred, a feeling that, despite all the odds against us, we had reached the other side of the storm, not unharmed. We carried scars, visible and invisible, but intact. I heard light steps and turned to find Madison at the porch door, hair disheveled, still in pajamas. "Good morning, Grandma," she murmured sleepily. "Can I join you?" "Of course, my love." She sat next to me, shrinking slightly from the fresh morning air. I put my arm around her shoulders, pulling her closer to share my warmth. "What are you thinking about so early?" I asked. "About school," she replied. "I am working on a family history project for sociology class." "Really? About what exactly?" She hesitated for a moment. "About how families face crises and transform. About resilience." I smiled, understanding immediately. "And you are thinking about writing about our story." She nodded. "Do you think it would be too, I do not know, exposing too much?" I considered her question carefully. Our story was certainly private, painful in many ways, but it was also powerful, important. "I think it depends on how you tell it," I replied finally. "We do not need to expose every dark detail to share the lessons we learned." "And what were those lessons, Grandma? For you, personally?" The question made me reflect. What had I really learned through that whole ordeal? I learned that dignity is not something anyone can take from you unless you allow it. I began slowly. I learned that we are never too old to start over, to fight for what is right, to demand respect. Madison listened attentively, her eyes fixed on me. I learned that people are not always who they seem to be, but also that there is genuine kindness in the world, like your great-aunt Helen, who opened her house to us without asking questions. "And about family?" she pressed. "What did you learn about family? That true family is not defined only by obligation or blood, but by daily choice. Your father chooses every day to be a better father, a better son. You and Jacob choose to be grandchildren who bring joy and purpose to our lives. Your grandfather and I chose to believe that we could rebuild what was broken. Is it a difficult choice sometimes?" I smiled at the insight of the question. Very difficult on some days. There are moments when pain or fear try to take control again, moments when it would be easier to close off, hold a grudge, give up. But we choose differently every day. Madison leaned her head on my shoulder, a gesture that reminded me so much of the girl she was, despite being at the doors of adult life now. "Thank you, Grandma. I think I know how I'm going to write my paper now." We stayed there in comfortable silence, watching the sun rise slowly on the horizon, bringing light to every corner of the garden. It was a perfect metaphor for our journey, from the deepest shadows to the gradual clarity of a new day. A week later, Madison asked us to read her paper before handing it to the teacher. We all gathered in the living room after dinner, each finding their usual place. David in his favorite armchair, Michael on the sofa, Jacob sprawled on the rug. Madison stood up, a little nervous, holding some sheets of paper. "Roots and Wings," a story of family resilience, she began to read. When we think of grandparents, we usually imagine sweet and fragile figures making cookies and telling stories of the past. Rarely do we see them as warriors, as survivors, as revolutionaries in their own lives. This is the story of my grandparents, Emily and David, who at 74 and 76 years old, respectively, taught me more about courage and dignity than any history book. While she read, I felt tears running freely down my face. She had captured our story with surprising sensitivity and insight for someone so young. Without exposing unnecessarily dark details, she painted an honest portrait of the challenges we faced and the strength we found to overcome them. "What I learned from my grandparents," she concluded, "is that age does not define our capacity for change, for growth, for struggle. I learned that family crises, however painful they may be, can be catalysts for necessary transformations. And I learned, above all, that genuine love is a force powerful enough to rebuild even what seems irremediably broken." When she finished, the silence in the room was loaded with emotion. It was Michael who spoke first, voice choked. "It is perfect, daughter, simply perfect." Jacob, who rarely showed emotions openly, had glassy eyes. "The teacher is going to cry reading this." David extended his arms, and Madison ran to hug him. "I am very proud of you," he said, "not only for the work, but for the person you have become." When it was my turn to hug her, I whispered in her ear, "You understood everything perfectly, my love. Absolutely everything." That night marked another kind of turn in our collective journey. Madison's work was not just an account of our story. It was a statement that we had not only survived, but we had transformed our experience into something meaningful, something that could inspire and teach others. The following week, Madison returned from school beaming. "I got an A+ on the project. The teacher wants me to read it to the whole class on Grandparents' Day." The news filled us simultaneously with pride and apprehension. Being present while our story was shared publicly would be a huge step. "Would you come?" asked Madison with doubts. "For the presentation?" David and I exchanged looks. It was a significant request, which would push us out of our newly established comfort zone. "Of course we will go," I replied finally, knowing it was the right answer despite the discomfort I felt. "We will be in the front row." The day of the presentation, I sat between David and Michael in the school auditorium, observing the other grandparents who had come for the event. White-haired couples holding flowers and cameras, proud smiles, the normal expectation of a common day of family celebration. Had any of them faced what we faced? Would stories of abuse, negligence, fear hide behind some of those smiles? Statistically, it was likely. Elder abuse is much more common than most like to admit, frequently hidden behind closed doors, disguised as care, justified as best for everyone. When Madison went up on stage, I felt a wave of pride so intense that it almost eclipsed the nervousness. She was beautiful, sure of herself, holding her notes with steady hands. "Roots and Wings," she began, her clear voice reaching every corner of the auditorium. While she read, I observed the reactions in the audience. I saw faces contract with empathy, eyes moisten, heads nod in recognition. Our story, although unique in its details, touched something universal: the struggle for dignity, family love, resilience in the face of adversity. When she finished, the applause was spontaneous and warm. Several of the other grandparents approached afterwards, wanting to meet us, some sharing fragments of their own stories. My daughter took us in when we could no longer live alone. We had to completely change our life at 70, confirming that, in fact, we were not alone in our experiences. A lady in particular moved me. She waited until most people had left and approached shyly. "Your name is Emily, right?" she asked, voice low, almost a whisper. "Yes, it is me. My name is Eleanor. Your story moved me deeply. I am going through something similar." I felt a chill run down my spine. I looked around, looking for who might be with her. "My son and my daughter-in-law," she explained, understanding my concern. "They are outside. They do not know I am talking to you." I took her hands between mine, noticing how they trembled slightly. "Eleanor, are you safe?" She hesitated, eyes down. "Most of the time. But things are getting worse. My medicines disappear, reappear. I have dizzy spells they cannot explain." My heart clenched. It was like hearing my own story being told again. "Do you have somewhere to go? Someone you can stay with?" "My sister, maybe, but it is hard. Simply leaving." "I know," I replied, squeezing her hands tighter. "Believe me, I know." We exchanged phone numbers discreetly. I promised to call, help in some way, even if only to listen. While returning home that afternoon, I shared the meeting with David and Michael. "We need to help her," said David immediately. "We know better than anyone what it is to be in that situation." Michael nodded, thoughtful. "Maybe we can create a support group. A safe place where the elderly in vulnerable situations can find resources, information, solidarity." The idea grew in the following days. We talked to social workers. We researched existing resources. We began to plan how we could transform our traumatic experience into something positive for others. A month later, we held the first meeting of what we called Project Dignity in the community room of the local library. We expected 3 or 4 people. 16 came. Eleanor was among them, stronger now, having found refuge with her sister. There were others, men and women, with stories painfully similar to ours: subtle neglect, psychological abuse, financial control, gradual isolation from friends and other relatives. I never thought I would talk about this in public. I confessed opening the meeting, David by my side, holding my hand to give me strength. But if our story can help even a single person find safety and dignity, it is worth reliving the pain. While each person shared a fragment of their story, I realized that we were creating something powerful there. Not just a support group, but a community, a safety net, a reminder that no one should face abuse alone, regardless of age. On the way home, David commented, "Do you know what impressed me most today? The courage. All those faces, all those different stories, but the same courage that made us leave in the middle of the night." I nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. It is as if our story opened a door so others could also speak, seek help. Maybe that is the real beginning, he reflected. Not only rebuilding our own life, but helping others to do the same. That night, lying next to David as we did for more than 50 years, I reflected on the extraordinary journey we had traveled, from the darkness of fear to the light of renewal, from isolation to community, from victimization to empowerment. "What are you thinking about?" asked David sleepily, his hand finding mine in the dark. "I am thinking that maybe, after all, there is a purpose in everything we went through." "A purpose?" "Yes. Maybe we needed to go through that to be able to help others now, to truly understand what so many elderly people face in silence, every day." David remained silent for a moment, considering my words. "I do not know if I believe suffering always has a purpose," he finally replied, "but I believe we can choose to give meaning even to the most painful experiences." I smiled in the dark, squeezing his hand. And that is what we are doing, is it not? Choosing to transform our trauma into something useful, something bigger than ourselves. "Yes," he nodded softly. "That is exactly it." I fell asleep with a sense of peace that had eluded me for so long. The journey had not ended, probably never would completely end. But every step, every difficult conversation, every hand extended to someone in a similar situation moved us a little further from the shadows of the past. And maybe that was the true victory. Not only surviving, but transcending. Not only healing our own wounds, but using the wisdom gained with so much effort to help heal the wounds of others. At 74 years old, when many expect only rest and tranquility, I had discovered a new purpose, a new direction. I had learned that there are no age limits to start over, for courage, to make a difference. This was the message I would carry with me for the days, months, and years to come. It is never too late to recover your voice, your dignity, your freedom. It is never too late to transform pain into purpose. It is never too late to start over. Now, if you like this story, click on the next video appearing on the screen, because in it there is a story of betrayal and twists, like you have never seen before.